Good morning, and thank you everybody for attending the Advanced Therapies Investor Day. My esteemed panel here are going to talk about cell therapy commercialization. Initially, I'm going to get each of the panelists to do a quick introduction to themselves and their companies, because as you will see, we have a very good range of experiences in the cell therapy field, and I think that will have an influence on what each of them say next. So, Zami, if you'd like to.
My name is Zami Aberman. I am serving as the chairman and CEO of Pluristem Therapeutics out of Israel. We collect cells from the placenta and inject them without match to a variety of disorders, starting with ischemic disorders and hematopoietic deficiencies.
Adam Kelliher, I'm the CEO of Avita Medical. I'm recently appointed about 6 months ago to push forward with the commercialization of the product, which is an autologous cell harvesting device, which enables us to very quickly and very effectively at bedside or in theatre harvest a cellular suspension, which we use primarily for burns, chronic wounds, and repigmentation disorders.
Hi, I'm Eduardo. I'm the CEO of TiGenix, a Belgian company. We have the first ever cell therapy approved product in Europe, ControlSelect, that is today being commercialized by Swedish Orphan. And we announced in August as well the first ever in the world phase 3 positive stem cell trial, a product that we intend to commercialize for complex perianal fistulas in a couple of years from now.
My name is Alex Voss. I'm the CEO of PharmaCell. We are a contract manufacturing organization exclusively focused on cell therapy and regenerative medicine. We work with companies from early stage translational work to bring a product into phase 1, make it GMP compliant, all the way to phase 3 and early commercialization, supporting companies like Dendron establish their manufacturing platform in Europe, and also now supporting TiGenix in producing ControlSelect for them. We have 2 sites. We're based out of Maastricht in the Netherlands. One site more focused on the pilot manufacturing, and a larger site from which ControlSelect is also manufactured, where we focus on the late stage and commercial products.
Thank you very much. And I'm Julie Simmonds. I'm a healthcare analyst at Panmure Gordon. Now, initially, I think I'd like to ask each of the panelists what they see as the greatest challenge for commercialization of cell therapies.
Okay, I'm honored to start. That's great. So I think that the main challenge is to convince ourselves and the industry and the regulators that we have a product and not one case situation, meaning in the allogenic space that we should demonstrate that we can use different donors and to have the same product, and in order to do so, you have to have significant improvement in manufacturing capabilities. And it has been heard before that the process is the product in cell therapy. And I think that people start to realize that in any aspect of cell therapy, we have to control the manufacturing process to ensure batch-to-batch comparability and batch-to-batch consistency.
Okay, we are actually in market and have been in market for a number of years. And what we have encountered as the main obstacle is really just challenging medical orthodoxy. They have an established way of dealing with certain conditions. And so our approach really has been to offer our device as an adjunct to traditional therapy rather than go in with the compelling sales message that everything you've been doing is wrong. It's I think, preferable to go in and say that this works within your toolkit of offerings. So, pragmatic approach.
Eduardo,
Not to be difficult, I'm going to have to. One is, I think that the most important one for me is to have the data. I think that today, in the majority of the cases, we do not have compelling data on sufficient large number of patients on control trials that will shape the way those patients are treated. The second one then would be convince the reimbursement authorities to pay for the advancement that those products will represent. And there was a lot of discussions on the previous panel discussing that. So those for me will be the 2 things.
Well, I'll limit my comments to the area of manufacturing, which we know best. Clearly, some of what Zami already said is to come to your clinical development program with a scalable manufacturing process is a critical element for manufacturing. What we see is many companies being under a lot of pressure to get to the next clinical trial, which can then still be executed, either themselves or with the support of a CMO, but then to go beyond that and then to build the platform across broader trials, bringing in pharmaceutical partners who will look at the scalability of that platform, I see is absolutely a core challenge.
Thank you. So as you can see, we have a wide range of views about what actually makes the challenges of commercialization. We have process, the medical orthodoxy once you get it to market, data, reimbursement, and the scalability of the manufacturing. So lots of different things to overcome. Currently, the most advanced therapies are most commonly autologous therapies, which, although have a benefit in immunogenicity, generally have a much higher cost of goods than expected. How do the panel see the source of the cells influencing the commercial development of the sector? I think, Eduardo, you've probably got a unique perspective on this, given your company works with both.
Well, we have both. I think that we're a little bit agnostic here. I think that depending on what you want the cells to do, you may end up with an autologous product or allogeneic product. You cannot have cartilage cells injected allogeneically. What we've discovered is that for some of the large disease areas that we're planning on targeting, the allogeneic model offers significant advantage in terms of simplicity of the supply chain and significant improvement on margins. So for Condor Select, we're with an autologous product. For the rest of the two platforms that we have in place, we have favored the allogeneic way. And again, I think that it's very important to say that there's no significant immunogenicity associated with the allogeneic use. So, we're not giving any immunosuppressant concomitantly to the allogeneic cells, and we haven't seen any significant reaction to the repeat dose of allogeneic stem cells.
Alex, you work with both sorts in your manufacturing. Have you any thoughts on this?
Well, it's clear that even where we are today, most of the autologous processes are extremely manual. And we see a tremendous opportunity to translate that into closed systems. But there's a limit to how far you can take labor out of that process. And so specifically just the QC work that needs to be done to qualify and release the product will always be a significant cost component. So there's a limit in terms of what indications you can address. Also, there are still a lot of challenges on the allogeneic side of really bringing it to full scale. I think both approaches seem to, from what we see from clients, to serve specific indications needs. So, longer term, I think both will continue to play an important role.
Excellent, thank you. Bringing it back to the manufacturing side of things, there's obviously the ability to manufacture in-house or use an organisation such as PharmaCell to help that manufacturing process. Again, Eduardo, TiGenix has used both processes in the past. I mean, how do you see the difference of which you choose when and how?
Well, again, things happen as they happen. It was not planned, probably. We built our own manufacturing facility, and at one point we decided that once the product was sufficiently characterized, it was better that someone that does only manufacturing would take over, and that's the reason why we ended up having a deal in place with PharmaCell that bought the facility and has been manufacturing for us. We keep the manufacturing of our allogeneic products for the time being ourselves, just because I think that while you're developing the process, it provides extra flexibility. How we will manufacture allogeneic products in the future, we haven't decided yet.
Mm-hmm. As a CMO, how do you see that market developing, Alex?
Well, what I see, one comment I want to make is that a CMO cannot substitute for the scientific know-how embedded in the process. So to have a strong know-how about your process and learning by doing, perhaps in a smaller scale facility, is definitely a strategy that can deliver a lot of benefits. And I'm interested to hear also Zami comment on his strategy, what that takes. But then as you see scale coming up, and where we see our role is really putting the boundaries around it and making it industrial. That's where a CMO can help. Our ability to muster resources in terms of people, infrastructure, logistics know-how, etc. there we can play a role in really a rollout strategy, apart from work a CMA might do on process development. So embedded know-how to have that and leverage some level of internal infrastructure, I think will be an important factor for success, because a CMO cannot substitute for the in-depth scientific knowledge.
So probably we'll go back to history. Back in 2006, we discovered that cells are completely different from any other biological product. And if in the antibody business people say that manufacturing of antibody is some kind of an art, cells are more complicated creatures. And because of that, we made a decision in the early beginning to develop our own process, because to our understanding, in order to keep the integrity of the product, the batch-to-batch consistency, you have to control all the parameters. I will give you one example. One is using conditioned media or serum-free or serum. You change the serum, you change the product. So you have to control all the ingredients, and the only way to do it is to control it. And probably the best example that if you look today into the big guys, the biological companies, all of them are manufacturing the complicated product by themselves. Only the simple stuff is out-licensed. So to my opinion, if one wants to be a player in the space and to be the Amgen, the Celgen of the cell therapy, you have to control manufacturing.
Thank you very much. Now, Adam, Avita has a completely different approach in that the manufacturing is essentially done by the bedside. What particular issues does that raise?
Training is key. Obviously, I mean, it's a fairly simple process, but obviously things can go wrong if people are not properly trained or they're doing it in a hurry. So you have to hold their hand throughout the whole process with good in-theatre training and post-operative as well, just to make sure they're using it again and again in a consistent fashion. And I also just wanted to follow up on this idea about manufacturing. I mean, we have looked at this quite closely, and in fact just got a very healthy contract from the American government under their BARDA scheme. And our view is to outsource as much as possible, but to sort of keep the black box of the process in-house, so that we maintain the integrity of that. Yeah.
And so in terms of that, how much can you outsource of what you do?
Quite a bit, yeah. I mean, it's a medical device, so I mean, it's sort of injection molding and all that good stuff. So we don't want to go down that line, but we have a proprietary enzyme at the heart of the process, and that's something that we like to control.
So similar to Zami in the sense
yes.
that it's controlling that
yes.
very specific
and it's
part.
common sense, right? We're dealing with new breakthrough products, and you should try and hold your integrity on that front.
Absolutely. Which leads quite nicely on to the next question in terms of regulation of new technologies and how you convince regulators that something, in a sense, which is still very novel and they don't quite understand the process, as to how the reception is as these new technologies are coming through. Now, Adam, you've obviously recently had your product approved. So
yes, I mean, we have approval in Europe and China and various other countries, but we are approaching other significant markets such as the US and Japan. And actually, we've found in regenerative medicine they're quite enlightened. Japan has an abbreviated process, which is, I think, well known. And the FDA have just followed up recently with this, what they call an expedited access pathway for life-saving medical devices. And we understand that's because they were feeling a bit competitive with the Japanese. I think, none of this actually relaxes the regulatory environment, but they're talking about an earlier approval based on subsequent delivery of data. So I think there's a fairly sensible approach happening.
excellent. And Alex, as far as you're concerned, when from a CMO's perspective, how much can you help with the sort of the regulatory process, and how do you see that developing?
Well, I mean, what we've done in a number of cases is support comparability work. So, creating the initial help support with data, the regulatory dossier for the CMC part for an EMA approval, and making sure that from a manufacturing perspective, it is clear to the regulators that this is a reliable, robust, and scalable platform, and so the security of supply is important. What we've seen is that regulator asks specific questions on whether you control the supply chain. And so once the product is approved to market, that in fact there is a certain certainty of supply. So that's what we do. And so also then there's obviously an inspection where they come and test that and want to see it with their own eyes. So that's the kind of support, and we tend to work closely with the regulatory group in supporting data and reviewing, CMC sections, etc. But clearly, it's the sponsor eventually, or obviously, who takes the final responsibility on that.
Probably. We are the one that are working with 6 different regulatory agencies: European, Germany, US, Japan, Korea, and Australia as of today, and Israel. And I think that what we find out is that if you play open with them, give them all the data, all the comparability data, they are open to changes. I think that my impression from all the regulators that they are open, they want to learn the new field, the cell therapy, and they're willing to accept any good rationale that you present. None of them will accept something like, believe me, it is true, show me it is true, and they will accept. And I think that it's something very important to realize, because I've heard from some people in our space that they have some negative attitude toward the regulators, and it generates a negative atmosphere. It's not true. It's not right. We have to understand that the main concern of the agencies is patient safety. And we know that when people are hyping and running, they have a tendency to approve things earlier than later, and I think that the regulator role is to ensure that the safety is there, and we, as the industry, we're doing it in the proper way. So I like the interaction with the variety of regulators we're working with.
Eduardo, you've obviously have approved products, so how have you found that the regulators, and is their approach changing since Condra Select was approved a while ago now?
I think that the regulators are as lost as we are. And I agree with Zami that the best way is to discuss with them, be very open, because they do not know. We do not know, so it's a question of learning by showing and them accepting that there's going to be things that we will not know at the time they're going to be making the calls. So I've always recommended go very early and discuss very openly. I think that we've always been helped by the regulators.
And just sort of continuing on that, you talked earlier about clinical data being one of the things you see as the key hurdle to commercialization. Are the regulators changing what they require in terms of clinical data in becoming stricter on the requirements for the trials, or is that something where they continue to see this as slightly different to maybe conventional pharmaceutical development?
Well, I think that the day you want to commercialize a product, you will have to show to the agency. In Europe, if you're lucky on your negotiations and you go for an orphan designation, probably one single pivotal trial, but with a more stringent p-value. At least that was what was required from us. While in the US, the FDA requires a second phase 3 clinical trial. So is that going to change? I don't think so. And all these ideas about expedite review and expedite approval, which I think, look very nice, I'm very skeptical that they will have a real impact, simply because what you then find is that no one wants to pay for them. So one thing is getting approval, then the next step is you need to convince reimbursement authorities that they will pay for them. Now, they are scared to pay even when you have phase 3 convincing data. So when you go with an open trial of 15 patients that you have followed only for 6 months, and you try to ask them to pay for 20 times when they're used of paying, I think that I want to see them paying one of those, and then I will be more convinced.
I agree and disagree, Eduardo. I think that if you look into the adaptive pathway, which is recently accepted in Europe, they ask you to work with the reimbursement agencies from the beginning. So before you have the endorsement of the clinical study, you have to have the reimbursement agency's opinion about your clinical endpoint, whether they will support it or not later on. So it put on us a burden to convince them, and now we are in a position that we have already agreed with the EMA about the direction of the CLI phase 2 pivotal study protocol, and now we are facing the question with the reimbursement agencies how to convince all of them together to agree on the right clinical endpoint in order that they will approve the reimbursement later on. So I think that if you do it in advance, then you avoid the issues following phase 3. And I think that the main issue in the adaptive pathway is to demonstrate significant efficacy. And I think that whenever you have clear data, and I agree with Eduardo, the data will speak for itself. Good data will convince the reimbursement agencies that it's doable. Questionable data, low p-values, low number of patients is convincing. And one thing to remind everybody, that we had a study with 20 patients which we demonstrated significant p-value. And people have been questioning how come that in 20-patient study you can demonstrate significant efficacy. And then I remind people the statistic that we have learned when we studied in the university, that the p-value is defined by the order of magnitude of improvement and the standard deviation. So if you have large improvement, p-value is there.
Yeah, I mean, I would absolutely agree with that you've got to have clear communication with the regulatory authorities and essentially get them to sign off on the statistical power of your trial. Otherwise, you're going to get a hand grenade in your lap at a very unfortunate stage of proceedings. So I completely agree.
And as far as you found getting your product to market, Alex, to start with, sorry, Adam, to start with you, with the data you've had, have you found that has allowed you to get the appropriate reimbursements that you need to be able to sell the product on the market? Or?
Not to date. We are not under reimbursement, but we're working on that. In the UK, we're in discussion with NICE, who are doing a retrospective study to look at the health economics. So there are dialogues going on with various countries, but unfortunately we haven't married the approval with the reimbursement to date. Yep.
And do you think that additional clinical data is what they're looking for to get that, or is it just the fact that they're not familiar with the way that cell therapies work in comparison to more conventional treatments?
They are not familiar with it, and so we are putting forward fairly persuasive, what we believe are persuasive cases, showing that we can reduce time in intensive care units and that there's a whole cascade of savings. But it's not just going to happen on one day. It's the whole path of treatment of a patient. So, there are quite a few variables in there, and it is, as you say, an education program because it's a new idea.
Mm-hmm. And have you found a similar issue with ChondroSelect in the sense that the benefit is obviously longer term than normal treatment?
Yeah, the problem is that you never conduct a trial that will show that 15 years down the road you will not need replacement therapy. So unfortunately, that's what some of the regulatory authorities or reimbursement authorities have asked from us. Like, as you can imagine, we do not have the data, therefore we do not have reimbursement. So ChondroSelect is a very good example in which the product has been reimbursed openly only in 3 countries in Europe. And
do we think that's going to be a continuing problem for cell therapies in the sense that conventional medication tends to be a treatment that is ongoing and therefore the cost is naturally spread over several years, decades, whatever it might be. Whereas with cell therapy, you're tending to see something that's quite often an upfront payment for what is a longer term benefit. And is that going to require some change from the reimbursement authorities and how they think about this?
That's the reason that we have to demonstrate significant improvement. Because when you have the significant improvement and you can show at least 1 or 2 years with consistent improvement following the treatment, then people will accept it as with a good rationale for reimbursement. If your claim will be that it costs more than conventional drug or more than conventional treatment without significant benefit, nobody will pay for it. And I think that the promise of the cell therapy is a significant improvement. Look on immune therapy, what happened in the last 2 years. It became, and there is a discussion later on, it became so attractive to people because it looked like that it's long-lasting effect. So people are not arguing today the potential high cost of the treatment. People look for good therapeutic benefit.
But this is not only cell therapy. I think that, pharma companies are facing this on all the products. Sovaldi is a very good example. I mean, it's not cell therapy, it's not immunotherapy, and then they suddenly came with this cure of hepatitis, and then suddenly they want to be paid, rightly so maybe, for all the costs that a patient will incur during their lifetime. Well, we've seen that the pricing was very high, but was not as high as they anticipated. And as soon as there's a second product on the market, then the competition will drive the price down to a probably more acceptable level for payers. But I think that how do we price and how authorities will end up reimbursing these one-off therapies for otherwise chronic diseases, I think that remains, there's plenty of papers, and you see that payers are not particularly happy on changing the reimbursement habits, especially in the US with all the changes in lives going from one plan to the other. So I think that remains, there's a lot of uncertainty on how this will evolve.
Probably one comment. The only thing that the reimbursement agencies care is money. They want to reduce their expenses. Sorry to say it in that way. And because of that, when we start to develop a product, we have to take in consideration that you must have a very efficient manufacturing process to bring the product in a reasonable price. Otherwise, you will work hard for 10 years to approve something, and then probably somebody will pay. So I think that you have to take it in consideration. It's a different approach from a small biotech company that you start something and you face manufacturing issues you don't have the money to do, and you lose it from the beginning, and you start to move forward with the assumption that when I will show the data, people will pay for the manufacturing costs or manufacturing chain. But remember, you change it later, and it was heard from GSK, you change the product later, you change the product, and you start from the beginning. So I think with all the pittiness on that, we have to start manufacturing thinking on day one, not after phase 3. Otherwise, we will not meet the need of the industry for an advanced treatment with reasonable cost.
Alex, do you have some thoughts on that?
Well, I think maybe to expand on that is that in terms of reverse engineering where you need to end up is going to be critical. One thing that I've observed is that this whole discussion about what a drug is worth has become much more explicit in the last 15 years. Before there was, health technology assessment and a lot of these things were treated qualitatively. Now, I just recently read a newspaper article where they explicitly stated, well, in the UK, it's £35,000 per quality of life, and in Holland, it's 80,000, right? And that's a surprising statement, and that's not a formal statement, but I think it shows that discussion is becoming much more explicit, and we probably see it in other European and maybe countries and in the US perhaps as well, which means that that across the whole aspects of your business case, including manufacturing, that to have a window on how you're going to get there is critically important. But you have already a significant additional delay post-regulatory approval to get to your reimbursement, and investors will start asking these questions very early on, maybe before even entering into a Series A or say Series B investment, that you at least have directional answers to those questions.
And is there anything specific that can be done from a manufacturing perspective? So I think when we were discussing this prior to the panel, you were talking about closed systems, for example, to improve manufacturing, take out some of the labor costs that are involved to bring costs down. I mean, is that something that companies need to look at maybe a much, much earlier stage than possibly small companies think about now?
Well, we are doing that, right? I mean, companies come to us and ask us, how things will look from a scaling perspective. And we show that based on what we know, what are realistic targets. And sometimes that's actually disappointing, right? Because you can only take so much labor out of the process, and the QC is then suddenly 50% of your cost structure. Right, and so maybe that requires a fundamental rethinking then. So we try to kind of provide a perspective, and then it's a question on whether a company wants to take on that challenge by themselves or want to engage, us or work with the Catapult or others to fundamentally redesign the process. But rather do that up front than after you spend 20 million on the wrong proposition, like Zami was saying, and have to go back to the bench after that.
This is sort of a catch-22. I mean, we're on the investor day. Ask your investors for 20 money before you start dosing a patient, and I think that you will find it very difficult. So you need to have some clinical data to try to convince people that indeed your theory about how your cells will work makes sense. So it's sort of a catch-22, and I have to say, I do not believe that we're going to see cell therapy being produced at ridiculous costs. I think that is going to be expensive, and that's the reason why if you look at what cell therapy companies are trying to do, is go for diseases where the unmet medical need will allow us to get the prices that we need for the product to be commercially viable.
So Eduardo and myself know each other for about 15 years.
At least.
And I think that, we have some disagreement, and the disagreement is,
Good. Disagreement on a panel. This is what we want.
I tell you, I think that we, as players in the cell therapy, must take in consideration that it's our mission to prove that we can manufacture the product in a reasonable price. We cannot say that we will do the best benefit to the patient, and then the reimbursement agency will pay any amount or high amount of money. So that's a difference in strategy, because we made a decision not to enter into pivotal studies before we endorse the manufacturing, before the manufacturing process is approved for marketing. We spent $50 million on manufacturing tools, and we delayed the pivotal studies by 4 years. We have been criticized by that, but the only time to prove it is in the end of the story, when the product is in market. So we don't know the answer, but at least the strategy is clear. Make it as early as possible. And what I say to many entrepreneurs that are coming to take some advice, and they start, think, manufacture for day one. Don't say, I'm from the university, I don't care about manufacturing, I know how to do it in the bench, and then GSK will take care about manufacturing. Not true. You have to bring the solutions, even though it's difficult. And in the end of the day, that's the difference between the successful companies in the future and the others. So we should not take excuses. We should build a solution. That's my opinion.
So from an investor perspective, I mean, Eduardo, you've had investors since you've showed some early data with CondraSelect. How have they taken the time it has taken and the investment it took to build your manufacturing facility in the first place?
It took it very badly. I mean, it's like we IPO at, I mean, I was not there, but with the company IPO at 5, we were at 1. So, you know, but it was, I don't think it had nothing to do with manufacturing. I mean, the reason for that sudden drop was the FDA changing their mind that they needed a second phase 3 clinical trial, so suddenly the US market disappeared from the picture. And then was the disappointment on the sales of CondraSelect in Europe due to 2 factors. One, that indeed the reimbursement took longer and we didn't achieve reimbursement in a sufficient number of countries. And number 2, and you know, it was mentioned before, we suffer from this hospital exemption rule, and you know, the business model was done on the assumption that indeed there will be no other chondrocyte products being sold in Europe from January 2013, which unfortunately is not the case. So again, we're competing with products that do not have the same standard, that do not have the same costs, and therefore can be sold at a significant discount to CondraSelect in markets like Germany, Spain, the UK, and that means that those markets were not available for sale, and finally, I mean, your sales are much lower than what you have communicated in the past. Your analysts do the numbers, and then it's like, rough, you know, your stock price collapses. That's what happened.
Just one comment about investor. We are a public company from day one, since 2003, and I agree that the investor don't like to see any investment in infrastructure. So we have been criticized in 2006-07 when we made a decision to build our own manufacturing and not to go to a CMO. I think that in the end, it will pay itself because we have the capacity to do it today. And you know, 10 years ago, GE was not in the space with the mission statement that they will produce the tools that are needed for the cell therapy. So we felt alone, and we had to develop many tools. But I think that in the end of the day, that's what's important, to have the ability to manufacture the tools, the cells, in a reasonable price.
Coming on to that, the sort of pharmaceutical interest in the space so far, obviously we've heard from some of the farmers today that have an interest, but it's still not generated as much investment from the pharmaceutical industry as maybe some other sectors have. How do you see them entering the sector helping? I mean, is it going to be in aiding the investment in some of these manufacturing processes, or is it going to be later down the line?
Again, if I will start with that. I think that the main issue is the statement of us, the cell therapy companies, that we have what people have been calling magic cells that do everything. It's not true. You have to have different cells for different indications. And I think that what is really missing in the space today is clear evidence. So the TiGenix phase 3 data is first step, phase 3 data that demonstrate significant efficacy. The pharma company must see significant clinical data, and then they will enter into the space. The main issue in the cell therapy space is some disappointment. As probably you are aware, some pharma companies enter into the space without mentioning names, and we're disappointed. Some of them return their rights back to the parties aboard. So I think that what we are missing is strong clinical data. I believe it will come now. TiGenix is the first one to represent. I hope that will be the second, and then other companies, and then they will build the confidence and will enter into the space.
Well, we would hope that they would get involved. I mean, our particular space is more the med tech, so that the players are sort of Smith and Nephew and Hollister, Integra, those sort of players. So I think it's a bit of a different field, but we would hope for a few more elephants in the room going forward.
My view is that we're not in page 1, chapter 1. Probably we're in page 3 of chapter 1. Sorry, Martin's like, at least we have been here 10 years, so at least 2 pages. But I think that, if you look at what happened in the past with monoclonal antibodies, no pharma company wanted to go into the space, to the point that some of the big biotech companies today became big simply because there was no one else interested in acquiring them. So that's the reason why the Amgen, the Biogen, the Genentech, and when Roche, which was on the verge of disappearing because they had nothing, acquired half of Genentech for what at that point seemed to be an completely outrageous amount of money, they've made the best deal of their lives, and today Roche is what it is, thanks to that probably crazy at that point acquisition. And I have to say, sorry again, Martin's not the GSK only, but big pharma are a little bit like a herd, and they do not go to jump into something that no one else is jumping. And no one was talking about anything. Suddenly, immuno-oncology and CAR-TBs are the space. So if you do not have a CAR-TB, you buy whatever you find on a CAR-TB because you need to explain to your CEO why you don't have a CAR-TB. No one knows whether the CAR-TBs will make it or not, but this goes to some other technologies that you can think of, and then the companies go out, who cares, we spend 800 million, it's not worth it, we throw it away. I see some companies making acquisitions. I think that there's been some serious moves. I think that the Pfizer deal with Selectis is probably pretty serious. I think that the acquisition yesterday or the day before of Okata by Astellas is pretty serious. I think that the fact that Astellas has created the cell therapy division, the fact that Novartis has created the gene and cell therapy division, now reporting directly into Joe Jimenez, I think that those are the sort of things that shows that things are coming. Now, it will take time, so we're not counting on them, and we will keep developing the compounds ourselves.
Alex, do you have any?
Well, I think it's clear. I mean, bigger pharmaceutical companies have the resources to create certainties in areas of uncertainty, right? At the moment, they feel that the risks are reasonable, but then we'll kind of work with a biotech to create certainties on a lot of different cases, on different aspects. On the manufacturing side, I mean, you see that Novartis entered the space and really spent, don't know the numbers, but a significant amount of capital buying a facility from Dendreon and having huge teams out there sorting out the manufacturing, both from a process development as well as from just creating and upgrading the infrastructure. So on the manufacturing side, they're really building the certainty. Where they, get what we see is that they get more nervous when you're in a GMP1 academic phase 1 unit, and they have no idea on how to break out of that. And so when they enter into a collaboration in phase 2, how am I going to break out of an academic unit and really have a platform from which I can scale early commercial, or then subsequently build maybe their own manufacturing plant. And I think that is what is an important aspect, at least on that aspect, on that part where pharmaceuticals will make a trade-off, and they can bring value to create the resources to kind of bring that up to an industrial standard.
I think we often talk about pharmaceutical companies there about being very much more focused on the marketing as well as the sort of research side of things. I mean, do you think that's an area where they can really help the adoption of cell therapy products? I mean, Adam, you were talking about the change in medical orthodoxy being required as to once you actually got it to market, about people actually using the products at the bedside.
Oh, massively. My former company was in a completely different area in omega-3, and there we saw all the benefit when GSK jumped in. I mean, they massively grew the market, and a lot of people followed on from that. There's no substitute for having reps out there doing the job in a professional way, and smaller companies, it's an uphill struggle, without a doubt. So, looking at that model, it was very good for the sector. I mean, the arrival of big blue chip pharma. So it really does play a role.
Eduardo, have you had some?
Yeah, I think that there's two things where I would see them adding, honestly, a lot of value to the sector. One, not only with big pharma, with some of the other big companies on the enabling technologies, I mean, like GE, that will help drive down the cost and you know, some of what happened as well with monoclonal antibodies some 25 or 30 years ago, when people thought that you could not produce out of those 5 liters bioreactors. It's like, look at the ones that we have today. The other one is, you know, big pharma brings the money and the long-term commitment to do large, well-controlled clinical trials, which will provide the data that I think that sometimes we're missing. You know, we're all trying to say, like, can we do it with 20 patients less? Can we do it in a subpopulation so we don't take 3 years or 4 years, but we can do it in 2. And those sort of, you know, cutting corners, sometimes you just pay the mistake, and it's better to do one, do it well, and if it works, fine, and if not, let's move to something else.
Is that where investors need to look at it differently, in having a better understanding that cell therapy trials might be required to be slightly longer because you can then do it in one go and demonstrate slightly longer point of view?
To my opinion, the investors want to see clear data. And whenever you see phase 2 data with post-hoc analysis, it questions the quality of the data. So I think that we as a company, we have to be very careful in designing the right clinical study, the right endpoint, and then to convince the investors that we have a clear pathway how to prove the product into the market, even though it's a small study, but the endpoint should be clear, design of the study should be clear, in order to convince that there is something and there is enough evidence to move to the next step, to the next clinical study, to the next indication.
I fully agree. I think that we've made a mistake, as a space in the past of trying to do many small phase 2s, just to show the potential. And I think that running, even if it's a phase 1 to A, you know, who cares? I don't think that investors care that much how long it will take. What they want is the certainty that the risk of getting that product into a positive phase 3 clinical trial X years down the road is as reduced as possible. That, I think, is what we have done probably not correctly, and that at least ourselves, you know, we've changed completely the size and the way we conduct the clinical trials. It's lengthier, it's much more expensive, but there's no other way to be financed, I think.
And presumably this is also where the pharmaceutical industry can help because of the funding of those trials, in that they are more prepared to fund bigger trials earlier, you think?
They are waiting for the data. They will come with the data is there.
It's another of those catch-22s, isn't it? Which,
well, I think that, again, if you're a big pharma, and I've had that conversations, they're very open about it. It's like, would rather pay 3 times as much, but you take the risk. Because, you know, the pharma company doesn't look good if they take the risk, and then no one gets a bonus for acquiring something cheap. You get a bonus for acquiring something that has very good data. So that's the focus.
Very good. So as far as going back to Aberman, the launch of your product onto the market, as far as sort of the training aspects are concerned, because all of these cell therapies, when they ultimately get to market, are going to require some additional training. How are you finding the actual hospitals in terms of being able to use the cell therapies appropriately? Does it come down to just training those at the bedside, or does the process need to sort of start higher up in the hospital management?
It needs to start higher up. You need some you know, KOLs and some big supporters within each hospital. So it's almost a negotiation hospital by hospital. So, you know, and it has to be done very thoroughly. But we have found people to be very receptive when we do these, you know, training events. A lot of interest from staff. So it has been very positively received. We under the contract that we just got with this BARDA deal, this US federal agency, they're actually funding a training program for us in advance of a launch in the US market. So we'll learn a lot from that as well in terms of doing it in a very structured way in that particular marketplace. And you know, there's lots of things you can do in terms of online video, that people can download, that sort of thing, to broaden the reach rather than having to be there face to face. But I sort of roll back and say that there is actually no substitute from being in theatre and actually doing that, the heavy lifting of that sort of training. Yeah.
And Eduardo, have you found a similar thing with the adoption of Contraselect, in that because it is a different product to what they are used to using, that creates an extra hurdle when it comes to that sort of final commercial step?
Well, again, depends. If you're a serious player like us, then yes, you are forced, because it's an obligation to train the hospital, make sure that they have the supply chain in place, that they have the controls in place. We ship the product in a container that follows the temperature, and they need to do all the paperwork. Now, if you're a company that is under hospital exemption, then you do nothing of that. You don't have quality control. You ship as you wish. There's no follow-up of the patients. And of course, they pay 1/3 of the price. So we need to decide which market we want to play in.
Yeah, they probably won't use it, right? That's the problem.
One point to mention, one thing that we discovered in our first clinical study, that the way the cells are prepared before injection are crucial for the quality of the study, because the conventional way that people take frozen cells and prepare them for injection is to use a water bath, which causes many issues of quality and so on. So we had to develop a thawing device, so the manipulation in the patient bed will be eliminated. So you take the vial, put it in, 6 minutes later, the cells are ready in the optimal condition to be injected using standard syringe and needle. So I think, again, if you want to bring a solution, you have to overcome the question. I know that in autologous setting, probably it's more difficult. But in the Allogenic, you complete your manufacturing, you complete your CMC when the cells are cryopreserved in bags or in vials, in our case in vials. And then you have to ensure that the preparation of the cells near the patient bed will be done in a proper condition and under control. And it's our duty to do it. We cannot blame the hospital later on because of lack of training that the injection was not done properly and the cells were injected in bad shape. So we have to take care. That's our opinion.
So essentially, the commercialization process and the manufacturing side, it does go the whole way through. There's no point at which you can be like a pharma company, ship it off to a wholesaler and hope
you start with living cells, and you end up when the cells are injected into the patient, not before. So that's the obligation.
Is that something that you think that the pharmaceutical industry will struggle with a little bit, because it doesn't fit into their standard supply chain?
I think that, but when we talk with the pharma companies, we demonstrate to them that we solve all the issues. So you manufacture them in place A, and then the shipment is confirmed, the thawing is confirmed. You have to show them that you have a solution. Otherwise, they will not touch it. They don't want to develop now a dry chain cryopreserved product supply. They don't want. They want to get it from somebody, from us, from GE, or somebody else. But the pharma companies, to my opinion, they want to see a solution, and then they will enter into the space. I know that people are now entering, or the pharma companies are entering into the immune therapy, which are missing a lot of manufacturing solution yet, but I assume it will happen in the end of the day. And the main reason, to my opinion, that the pharma are entering, because it sounds very great. CAR-T, as Eduardo mentioned, sounds very, very promising. Good initial data, so people are entering, and they are facing manufacturing problems that they will have to solve in the next coming years. So.
Eduardo, do you have a...
Well, I think there is part product, part service, and I think that, either pharma with several products or some of the medical device companies are used to, having the expert, being on the day that a certain very sophisticated product is used on the brain of a patient. So. I don't think that this will be a deterrent. I mean, again, if the data is there, if there's a real need for the patient and the product has sufficient margin, it will make money. So that's all we care about.
Do you think it's something where the patients will start to have a desire for these products? Because again, they're different to what else is out there at the moment.
Well, if I can speak for the complex perianal fistula, I mean, again, I've been in many disease areas in Big Pharma. When we announced that we were doing a phase 3 in Europe, we got letters from patients as far as Australia and Canada wanting to come to Europe to participate. When you have that sort of a medical need, I don't think that I will need a lot of reps telling the doctors, a patient that has a complex perianal fistula knows what is going on. and they will go to the hospital where this product is being used. So that simplifies things, provided the medical need is as strong as it is.
Yeah.
I mean, you have 3 customers really in this transaction, which are, obviously the doctor, procurement, and the patient. So all 3 have to be approached in different ways, but it is important. Yeah.
Good. Lovely. I think if anybody else got any points we haven't brought up yet, that
That was great. Well, thank you for the opportunity, and
Thank you.
Thank you.
all
these
very
are
much
worthy of commercialization, sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.